What if Darth Vader turned back to the light long before Return of the Jedi? What if the first cracks in his darkness began not with Luke, but with Obi-Wan, on a forgotten moon, in the aftermath of their final duel? What if during that time, in the months leading up to Vader and Obi-Wan's final confrontation, inner conflict had been stirring deep within Vader's heart and mind? What if slowly, feelings of regret and memories of a better life he once knew had begun eroding away his anger, hate and darkness, so that when he again encountered his old master, he was no longer emotionally impervious, but vulnerable? This is the untold story of a broken man, a flicker of hope, and the redemption that could have changed the galaxy forever. A fleet of star destroyers orbits a distant outer rim planet, as below on the surface a small city burned under the iron grip of the Empire. A rebellion had sparked in its streets, a flicker of defiance that Vader was sent to extinguish. He ordered a complete slaughter, a purge of every living soul within the city's borders. There would be no distinction, no mercy, only eradication. The screams of the dying echoed off stone walls as stormtroopers advanced, blasters firing indiscriminately. But then, amidst the chaos, Vader's gaze settled on a man cradling his dying wife in the middle of the street. She had been struck by blaster fire, her life draining away with every ragged breath. For Vader, it seemed as if time suddenly stood still as he watched from a short distance as the husband clutched her tightly, wailing, desperation etched into his face. Vader stopped, unmoving, frozen in place. In that moment, the world around him faded. The fire, the screams, the slaughter. All he saw was the man, helplessly holding the woman he loved as life slipped away. Sudden memories flashed unbidden through his mind. This was entirely unexpected.
You're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow.
For the first time in years, something deep within him was cracking. Then, without hesitation, the stormtroopers marched past him, blasters raised, and cut the man down where he knelt. His cry was silenced in an instant, leaving only the low hum of blasters and the distant thunder of war. Vader did not move. He remained there, staring at the bodies, feeling something he had long thought dead.
Stop now, come back. I love you.
Later, when he stood before the Emperor to report on the operation's success, the memory clung to him.
What is thy bidding, my master?
The victory felt hollow. His thoughts drifted back to the man in the street, to the woman in his arms, to Padmé. Hatred simmered beneath his armor, flaring at Palpatine's every word. It wasn't the first time he had felt this way, but now it was stronger, more visceral. He forced the emotions down to conceal them from the Emperor, burying them deep. Over the following months, he tried to silence the dissonance within him, throwing himself into his pursuit of Obi-Wan. He convinced himself that revenge would drown out the ghosts, that Kenobi's death would sever the last threads of conflict in his mind. But then, he found that encountering his old master only stoked the fire of his conflict further. When their final battle came, Vader unleashed everything, all the rage, all the conflict, all the desperation, as if obliterating Kenobi would somehow obliterate his own anguish. But in reality, it only made it stronger. On a desolate, rocky moon, the final, brutal confrontation between master and apprentice is taking place. Sabers flashed in the dark, the ground shattered beneath their power, and in the end, Obi-Wan gained the upper hand. With one swift strike, he split Vader's helmet open, revealing the scarred, familiar face of Anakin Skywalker beneath. But it was not the twisted, monstrous glare we expected. It was something fractured, tired, human. He didn't scream in rage. He was silent, breathing hard, struggling with his damaged respirator, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the world not through a red-tinted HUD, but through his own scarred, weary eye. Obi-Wan stood there, staring, breath caught in his throat. This was the face of the boy he trained, the friend he lost, the brother who fell into darkness. His voice broke as he said it.
Anakin.
And for a moment there was stillness. Vader didn't lash out. He just responded, almost whispering,
Anakin's gone. I am what remains.
But it wasn't defiance anymore. There was a tremor in his voice, a falter. This wasn't a Sith Lord reveling in darkness. This was a man suffocating under the weight of who he had become.
What will happen to me now?
Council have granted me permission to train you. You will be a Jedi. I promise.
Obi-Wan, tears forming in his eyes, stepped closer.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Anakin. For all of it.
Vader tried to shut down the inner conflict, to stay in control, but for some reason, something was shifting inside of him.
I am not your failure.
Obi-Wan. What I am, what I become, is my doing.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
And in that hesitation, there was a spark, not of anger, but of remorse. Obi-Wan didn't let up. He spoke of Padmé, her final words, her dying belief that there was still good in him. That struck Vader like a blade to the soul. He looked down at his mechanical hand, his broken body, the twisted remnants of a man who once dreamed of saving the galaxy.
Let me help you. Let me help you, Anakin.
Obi-Wan pleaded. Vader, still fighting against the conflict inside of himself, looked down at the ground.
Leave me, Obi-Wan. Leave me, now.
Then came the moment that broke the rules. Obi-Wan, trusting in the Force, did something unthinkable. He told Vader the truth.
You have 2 children, a son and a daughter. They're alive, Anakin.
He was revealing everything he had protected for a decade because something told him that the man in front of him, this broken, shattered thing, was no longer just Vader. It was a risk for Obi-Wan to reveal this information. He knew that. But yet, he felt in this moment that his words revealing the truth about Vader's children weren't his own. They were being guided by the Force, as if this was precisely what Vader needed to hear in this moment. Vader didn't respond. Tears welled in his one visible eye. There wasn't anger or hate, just pain, deep, impossible pain. Obi-Wan turned and walked away, leaving Vader standing alone in silence, his thoughts spiraling as wave after wave of conflicting emotions crashed over him. Grief, regret, confusion, each more disorienting than the last. And in the stillness of the desolate moon, the only sound that remained was the broken, rhythmic rasp of his own breathing. Vader returned to his fleet of Star Destroyers, resuming his duties as if nothing had changed. He barked commands, crushed dissent, and over the next few months maintained the fearsome image the galaxy had come to dread. On the surface, all was the same, but inside the conflict only deepened. He told himself it was weakness. He told himself he had buried Anakin forever. But in the shadows of his mind, visions began to creep in. Faint dreams of children he had never known, flickers of Padmé's smile, and memories of light he thought long extinguished. The Emperor noticed none of it. Their communications during this time were limited to holograms, with Vader carefully concealing his turmoil. When he informed his master that he would no longer pursue Kenobi, Palpatine saw it as a sign of renewed focus, of deeper loyalty to the Empire. But inside, Vader was unraveling. The name Skywalker echoed in his mind. The visions came more frequently, more vividly. And then came the night he could no longer run from them. In the solitude of his meditation chamber, bathed in darkness, Vader sat motionless. His mask hissed, then detached with a gasp of air. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the visions, flashes of Mustafar, of Padmé's face as she reached for him, of laughter from a simpler time. He saw children, a boy and a girl, the Force wrapped around them like light. And then, a voice.
"Hello, Anakin."
Vader looked up. A figure stood before him, calm, radiant, and unmistakably familiar. Qui-Gon Jinn. Vader froze, speechless. He hadn't seen this man since he was a child. Qui-Gon regarded him not with judgment, but with quiet empathy.
"I failed them. I failed everyone."
Vader turned and hung his head. Inside of him, there was a darkness still wanting to suppress the conflict he was feeling. But seeing Qui-Gon meant more to him than he was willing to let on. Qui-Gon, the closest to a father that he had ever had, but taken from him so soon, and now he was back. He was here again, standing in front of him. And suddenly Vader found himself wanting to tell him everything. He found himself wanting to return to the light.
As a boy, I had this vision of what I wanted to be, who I wanted to become, to help people, to be strong for those who are weak and to bring freedom to those who couldn't free themselves. I wanted to be good, but I've become a monster, a slave to my own fear and anger, driven to do horrible things. And it's taken me all this time to see it. I destroyed everything I was meant to protect.
Qui-Gon nodded slowly.
"Yes, you fell, Anakin, but you are not beyond redemption."
The Jedi betrayed themselves. They were blind and arrogant, too consumed by their own dogma to see the darkness rising right under their noses. They spoke of peace, but all they brought was war. They claimed to protect the galaxy, yet they failed to protect even themselves.
Yes, the Jedi lost their way, but so did you. And still, the Force calls to you.
Does the Force still call to me? How can it, after all that I've done?
Vader looked away, overwhelmed.
Why are you here, Master Qui-Gon?
Because there is still good in you. I'm here because the galaxy needs the man that you were meant to become. You were the chosen one, Anakin.
At this, Vader lifted up his head to look into Qui-Gon's eyes, staring back at him with a gentle but fervent focus.
And you still are.
Silence settled between them. Vader sat still, tears forming in his eyes as distant visions continued to flicker in his mind. Visions of his children, of Padmé, and of light. He said nothing, but his eyes, filled with pain, filled with resolve, said everything. Qui-Gon saw it.
You must go to Dagobah. There you will find Master Yoda.
And then, just as gently as he appeared, Qui-Gon faded into the shadows. Vader remained seated, staring into the dark, bringing stillness to his mind, clarity to his thoughts. He lowered his helmet back down, once again sealing himself inside as the sound of his rhythmic breath filled the empty room. And then, he rose. No longer as Darth Vader, the weapon of the Empire, but as something else, something awakening. He knew what needed to be done. In the quiet seclusion of his chamber, Vader closed his eyes as he reached out with the Force. Outside of his ship, the fleet of Star Destroyers began to tremble. It started as a subtle shift, then became an unstoppable storm. One by one, massive Star Destroyers began to groan and twist, dragged into motion by an invisible will. Vader's hands lifted slowly, his focus absolute. The room he stood in began to quake as the walls and floor groaned and cracked. And then it happened. The Star Destroyers began to collide with each other, one after the other, as the crews scrambled in panic to regain control before being suddenly silenced by fiery explosions. In minutes, an entire fleet was obliterated, destroyed not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. And from the heart of the chaos, through the wreckage and flame, a single Imperial shuttle surged forth. Vader's shuttle. He had escaped. And now, guided by a vision of hope he had long denied, he set course for Dagobah to begin again. Before reaching Dagobah, Vader made a stop on the planet Cavari, a quiet world mostly covered by vast oceans and home to the Mayari, a reclusive alien species known for their advanced medical technology. He sought freedom from the helmet that had hidden his face and defined his fearsome image for over a decade. The Emperor designed the suit not for comfort or functionality, but to instill fear, cause pain, and to imprison Anakin within it. But now, Anakin wanted to be free from it. The Mayari accept his plea. In a quiet ceremony that feels more like a spiritual rite than surgery, they work. They use living technology, organic mechanical hybrids that bond with his damaged lungs and throat, crafting a streamlined breathing apparatus which allows his face to remain uncovered and allowing him to breathe without the suffocating helmet. For the first time in years, Anakin was able to live in the world, seeing with his own eyes. Though he knew that in time his limbs and body could be further upgraded beyond the Emperor's crude designs, the removal of the helmet alone brought a profound shift. It was the first step in aligning his outer form with the transformation happening within. And then, as he stood quietly on a sandy beach of the ocean world, he shed his cape and armor plating, keeping only what was vital and leaving the rest lying in the sand like shed skin. From a compartment in his shuttle, he retrieved an old brown robe, one not too dissimilar from the one he used to wear as a Jedi, weathered and worn. Draping it over his frame, he set course for Dagobah, no longer Darth Vader and not yet fully Anakin Skywalker, but moving steadily toward the light. Shortly after Anakin's attack and destruction of the fleet of Star Destroyers, the Empire discovered what had happened. What had once been unthinkable had become a reality. Darth Vader had gone rogue. The Emperor, sensing the shift in the Force and the betrayal of his apprentice, responded with fury. He dispatched elite units to hunt him down, stormtroopers, death troopers, and he even ordered the Inquisitors to shift their focus from hunting down surviving Jedi and tasked them all with a single mission: find and destroy the man who had once been the Emperor's weapon. As Anakin pursued his path back to the light, he was at the same time being hunted. And Palpatine would stop at nothing until he had eliminated him as a threat. Anakin's shuttle descended through the thick clouds of Dagobah, vanishing into the mist and landing in a small clearing in the midst of the thick forest. As the ramp lowered, he stepped out into the swampy terrain, the air heavy with moisture, buzzing with unseen life. All around him, the Force hummed with strange energy, a balance of shadow and light. He stood still, breathing deeply through his new apparatus, taking in the raw, untamed presence of the planet. It felt alive and ancient. He returned to the shuttle and transformed the cargo bay into a temporary home. Crates were stacked and organized, supplies rationed. A small Bacta tank was rigged in the corner where he rested between long hours of meditation. He planned to stay here for a while, in hiding. He didn't yet know what would come next, only that the Force had brought him here, and that Yoda was near. Guided by a quiet pull in the Force, Anakin made his way through the swamp. Finally, he reached the edge of a clearing and saw it. A small hut nestled in the roots of a gnarled tree. The presence of his old master inside was undeniable, but he stopped, standing silently, unsure of what to say. The last time he had personally interacted with Yoda was many years ago, before the fall of the Republic and destruction of the Jedi. Yoda had warned him about the dangers of the fear of loss. And now, here Anakin stood, years later, having caused so much pain and suffering because he had not rightly heeded Yoda's counsel. For a few moments, Anakin stood silently, almost frozen, and then the door opened. Yoda stepped out slowly, leaning on his cane, looking up at him without surprise, as if he'd been waiting.
A long time it has been, young Skywalker.
he said, his voice as calm and steady as ever. And so began a new chapter. The swamp became his sanctuary, his training ground, his confessional. Qui-Gon's spirit appeared often, guiding him alongside Yoda. Day by day, through quiet meditation, hard truths, and soul-deep reflection, Anakin began to peel back the layers of fear, anger, and shame. It wasn't easy. He relived pain, faced memories long buried. But it worked. Slowly, steadily, he began to feel human again, whole again. Yet, even as light crept back into the corners of his heart, there were shadows that lingered, whispering in moments of silence, taunting him with memories of what he'd done and who he'd been. Beneath the surface, a constant fear simmered, that the darkness would take hold once more, and that no matter how far he ran, it would always find him.
Here is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Through Yoda's guidance, he labored to overcome these fears, learning to see the shadows for what they were. Remnants of pain, not prophecies of his future. But yet the darkness clung to him. Though he felt new and whole again in many ways, there remained a part of him that still identified with Vader. Not because he wanted, but because he felt he had to. Vader was who he had been for so long that he feared it was who he truly was, no matter how desperately he tried to escape it. In those moments of despair, Qui-Gon was a beacon of calm wisdom, reminding him that healing was not a path walked in haste.
This will take time,
Qui-Gon would say, his presence a steady light in Anakin's storm.
The darkness you carry is heavy, and it is deep, but it is not eternal. You are not bound to who you were. You are free to become who you choose to be.
Anakin found himself often on the brink of despair, but Qui-Gon's words always managed to offer some relief, bringing him a sense of comfort and distant hope. Anakin remained on Dagobah for nearly a year. Then one morning, as the mist drifted softly across the forest floor, Yoda and Qui-Gon both spoke the same truth. It was time to make peace with the man who never gave up on him. Anakin knew where he must go. He set course for the desert world of his childhood, for Tatooine, for Obi-Wan. Anakin's ship pierced the atmosphere of Tatooine like a shadow from the past. As the familiar twin suns bathed the desert in blinding gold, he felt a wave of memories rise to the surface. As the shuttle passed over the dry plains, something compelled him to look down. There, nestled against the sun-baked dunes, was a small moisture farm. He recognized it instantly, Owen Lars's homestead. And outside, running across the sand with a toy starship in hand, was a boy. No older than 10 or 11, carefree, smiling, innocent. That's him, Anakin thought, his breath catching in his throat. That's my son. He lingered at the window, his gaze locked on the child. A storm of emotion swirled inside him. Grief for what he had missed, awe at what still lived on, and a fragile hope that perhaps not all had been lost. Yoda and Qui-Gon had told him where to find Obi-Wan. He guided his ship to a quiet landing on the edge of the Dune Sea. The engines cooled, the ramp lowered, and Anakin stepped once more onto the sands of his homeworld. He walked in silence, every footstep pressing into memories. As he approached the modest hut nestled into the rock, the door creaked open. Obi-Wan had heard the ship, and now stood outside, watching. He squinted into the sunlight, trying to get a look at this unknown visitor. "Hello there," Obi-Wan shouted at the distant figure of Anakin, at first not recognizing him. Anakin stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. The two men simply looked at each other. Anakin's face bore no helmet now, only the scars of fire and time. His eyes carried the weight of unspeakable regrets. Obi-Wan's expression was unreadable at first, a stern caution in his gaze. And then it dawned on him who it was standing before him.
Anakin.
He could hardly believe it, and slowly the look of suspicion gave way to something gentler. A smile, a knowing, quiet smile. Anakin's lips trembled as he returned it. Then, without a word, they moved toward each other and embraced, two broken brothers, reunited after a lifetime of pain. Over the days that followed, they talked, long into the night, under the stars. They shared memories, regrets, laughter, silence. Slowly they rebuilt what had been shattered. Forgiveness came not as a single moment, but in the steady rhythm of old trust being restored. Anakin insisted that if the Republic was ever restored, that he need to surrender himself, and that he had to answer for the horrors he had committed. But Obi-Wan shook his head, telling him that now was not the time for that, and that the galaxy needed him now. He emphasized that the Emperor must fall, and that Anakin was perhaps the only one strong enough to make that happen. Reluctantly, Anakin agreed. He would fight, not for power, not for vengeance, but for hope. And something changed in Obi-Wan. The presence of his old friend, his brother, breathed life into a part of him that had long been buried. The warrior within him, tempered now by loss and reflection, stirred again. No longer would he simply hide and wait. It was time to act. Together, they began to make plans. They reached out carefully to the scattered, flickering embers of rebellion that had begun forming in the shadows of the galaxy. Anakin, once at the very heart of the Empire, became a wellspring of vital intelligence. He knew the Empire's inner workings, its blind spots, its weaknesses, its methods. And more than anything, he knew its master. It was Anakin who revealed the secret project underway in the deep reaches of space. A weapon of unimaginable power. The Death Star, still under construction, but dangerously close to completion. If activated, it would tip the balance of power so far into darkness that the galaxy might never recover. During that time, Anakin constructed a new lightsaber. A weapon not born of war, but of purpose. Its blade ignited in brilliant green, reflecting his renewed focus on the deeper wisdom of the Force rather than sheer combat power. It was also a tribute to his first true guide, Qui-Gon Jinn, whose presence had helped lead him back to the light. There was no more time to wait. Together, Obi-Wan and Anakin began to lay the foundation for something new. A rebellion not just of politics and tactics, but of hope. Anakin continued to wrestle with the darkness within. He was often tormented by dreams, nightmares, visions that seemed to come from another part of himself, taunting him, mocking him. Shadows of his past clawed at the edges of his mind. But with each passing day, Anakin also grew stronger in the Force, learning to quiet these storms of darkness when they came. He would often take walks in the vast Tatooine landscape, a quiet, familiar place where he could clear his mind and focus his thoughts. Meanwhile, the Empire's hunt for Vader had finally borne fruit. A whisper from the sands of Tatooine revealing his location alongside his old master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Grand Inquisitor stood before the flickering hologram of Emperor Palpatine, his head bowed in deference.
"We have found him, my lord. He is hiding on Tatooine, with Kenobi."
The Emperor's eyes flared with a sinister gleam.
Together are they. How poetic. The old master and his fallen apprentice reunited again, seeking redemption in the sands of that wretched planet.
His gaze hardened, the flicker of curiosity replaced with iron determination.
This ends now. Gather any inquisitors within reach. I want them mobilized immediately. Take with you 2 companies and leave no room for escape. I want them both annihilated.
The Grand Inquisitor nodded deeply, understanding the weight of the command.
"Of course, my lord."
Palpatine paused and his eyes narrowed in on the Grand Inquisitor.
There is more, isn't there?
"Yes, my lord. Our intelligence also uncovered something unexpected. There is another Skywalker, a boy, living on a moisture farm near the outskirts of the Dune Sea. His name is Luke."
The room fell silent as Palpatine paused.
A Skywalker. And so the children of Anakin Skywalker live. The son of Anakin could be a great asset. Once you've cleansed Tatooine of Kenobi and the traitor, bring the boy to me, alive.
It will be done, Your Majesty.
Later that night, while Obi-Wan slept, Anakin sat by the flickering glow of a small lantern inside their modest desert dwelling, his thoughts drifting in silence as shadows danced along the walls. He closed his eyes, letting the Force flow through him in quiet meditation. He reached deep within, feeling the currents of the Force wash over him, guiding him, strengthening him. But then something shifted. A ripple of darkness, sharp and sudden. Something was wrong. He sensed it. Anakin's eyes opened as he rose to his feet, his breath steadying as he focused, reaching out with his mind to pinpoint the disturbance. But before he could fully grasp it, chaos erupted. Blaster fire erupted from all sides as a full company of Imperial forces launched their assault. Over 100 stormtroopers, death troopers, and 6 deadly inquisitors, led by the Grand Inquisitor himself. Obi-Wan jolted awake and both ignited their blades, green and blue cutting through the smoke and fire. With practiced precision, they deflected the incoming blasts, shielding each other as they escaped the collapsing hut through a shattered wall. But outside, the true scope of the trap was revealed. They were surrounded. The Grand Inquisitor stepped forward, his saber already ignited.
Surrender or die.
Anakin looked around, analyzing the situation.
You don't have to do this. The Emperor's path only leads to destruction. There is still time to choose another way.
Weakness has poisoned you, Skywalker. There is no turning back. The Emperor will have you as his own, or he will break you into dust and memory.
Obi-Wan glanced sideways at Anakin, not with fear, but with the smallest grin.
We haven't been in a predicament like this together for a while, have we?
Anakin smirked.
One might argue that it's been too long, Master.
Obi-Wan smiled and took a breath.
Outnumbered 100 to 1. Not very good odds, is it?
Anakin twirled his saber with a grin.
This is where the fun begins.
Fire! The Grand Inquisitor shouted as a barrage of blaster fire lit up the night sky. Anakin and Obi-Wan became blurs of motion, deflecting blaster fire back into the enemy lines as the number of troopers began to dwindle. Anakin unleashed a wave of Force energy, sending a dozen soldiers flying back in an arc and creating an opening. The 2 Jedi leapt into the air, flipping behind enemy lines as the troopers shifted their aim and continued firing relentlessly. One by one, the stormtroopers fell, but with every wave they cut through, more seemed to arrive, reinforcements pouring in from the ridge. As the battle intensified, Anakin's strikes grew sharper, more aggressive, and inside, he could feel the pull to give in to that part of himself he had been so fearful of. His breathing grew heavier, and a familiar fire began to kindle in his eyes. Obi-Wan felt it, a surge of impatience and anger rising within his old friend. He turned mid-parry, deflecting a bolt as he called out,
Anakin, focus. Anger won't win this fight.
His voice was calm, steady, a tether pulling Anakin back from the edge. Anakin paused, his lightsaber humming in his grip as he took a steadying breath, nodding.
We need to end this, Obi-Wan,
he said as he launched back into the fray with renewed clarity. Then Obi-Wan shifted his position. Anakin deflected the incoming blaster bolts as Obi-Wan moved behind him, closed his eyes, and raised his hand over the ground. The sand around their feet began to stir, as what seemed like the whole desert floor around the battlefield began to lift off the ground, swirling into a massive cloud of sand and dust. Then, with a wave of his hand, Obi-Wan sent the storm forward. The sand blasted across the battlefield in a whirling cloud, enveloping the stormtroopers in a blinding haze. Visibility vanished as the desert wind howled. Troopers staggered as their blaster fire scattering aimlessly into the blinding torrent. and then Anakin and Obi-Wan charged into the cloud, seamlessly cutting down dozens of troopers, reducing their numbers and causing many to fall back in panic and confusion. Then the Inquisitors charged. Blue, green, and red blades clashed in a violent storm of light and motion as the thick haze of dust and sand shrouded the battlefield. It was 6 against 2, but to the outside eye, it appeared as if Anakin and Obi-Wan moved in perfect choreography, an unspoken rhythm that flowed between them. Their blades whirled and clashed, deflecting strikes from all sides while simultaneously redirecting blaster fire back toward the encroaching troopers. The red sabers struck with ruthless aggression, but Anakin and Obi-Wan countered with seamless precision, each covering the other's flank, as if the years of separation had never existed. One by one, the Inquisitors fell until only the Grand Inquisitor remained, his stance faltering as he faced them alone. He swung with desperation, but Anakin and Obi-Wan pressed forward, their combined power overwhelming him. With a final flurry of strikes, the Grand Inquisitor collapsed, his crimson blade extinguished in the sand. Realizing they were hopelessly outmatched, the remaining troopers broke ranks, scrambling back to their transports in full retreat. The battle was over. The cost of the encounter was clear, and Obi-Wan and Anakin knew that they couldn't remain on Tatooine. The Empire knew where they were, and worse, Luke and his family were now in danger. Anakin had not yet met Luke. Concerns about how Owen and Beru would feel about him being around Luke and the complications that it might create led him to keep his distance. And so it was decided that Obi-Wan would find them a safe place to go, while Anakin focused on continuing efforts to build the rebellion. In the days that followed, Anakin set off to find a new base, a world far from Imperial reach. He chose the frozen planet of Hoth, harsh and hidden. There he began to establish a base, reaching out to scattered rebel groups across the galaxy. One by one, he brought them together, uniting their efforts to form the foundation of a new rebel alliance. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan worked swiftly to relocate Owen, Beru, and Luke to a safe location, far from the Empire's grasp. When he rejoined Anakin on Hoth, the two began organizing. Together, they united the scattered resistance cells into a growing, coordinated rebellion. Anakin's insight into the Empire's tactics and weaknesses gave them a constant edge. They struck with precision, raiding supply convoys, sabotaging installations, disrupting the Emperor's grip on distant systems. With every victory, they gave the galaxy something it hadn't known in years. A light in the darkness. A new hope. The news of the Inquisitor's failure reached Emperor Palpatine swiftly. Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi were still alive, but this was a possibility he had always anticipated. For years, Palpatine had prepared for such contingencies. It was his nature to plan, to manipulate, and to anticipate betrayal or failure. Vader was powerful, but he was not irreplaceable. In the shadows of the Empire, hidden away from prying eyes, Palpatine had been cultivating new instruments of darkness for years. And now he had gathered them together, 3 fallen Jedi who had escaped the purge of Order 66. Once dedicated to the light, now consumed by darkness after years of hiding and despair. He had found 4 Zabrak siblings, each born with a raw connection to the Force and a natural ferocity that Palpatine had honed into something deadly. These had been molded in secret, trained in the darkest arts of the Sith, subjected to brutal trials that left them obedient and far more powerful than the Inquisitors. And now, the Emperor saw fit to bring them out of the shadows, necessity requiring that he abandon the rule of 2 to bring forth a new band of enforcers. United under a single banner, they became known as the Seven, a legion of darkness forged for one purpose: to crush the rebellion and to snuff out any flicker of light that dared to challenge the Emperor's rule. Now, with the Inquisitors defeated, Palpatine summoned the Seven to his throne room. His gaze swept over them with a focused intensity as he spoke.
Your time has come, my faithful apprentices. You have all been patiently waiting for this day. While the galaxy flounders in its chaos, you have been prepared in silence, sharpened for a purpose greater than they could ever comprehend. The Jedi, in their arrogance, believe they have found sanctuary, a flicker of rebellion that threatens the order we have so carefully crafted. But peace is fragile, security and safety even more so. It must be protected, not by those who cower in the light, but by those willing to embrace the necessary darkness. I have kept you in the shadows, hidden from sight, waiting for the time when your purpose would be fulfilled. That time, my friends, is now.
The rebellion, now stronger than ever under the leadership of Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, turned its eyes toward the Empire's most terrifying weapon, the Death Star. Word of Vader's defection had rippled through the Empire, causing fractures in its ranks. Some high-ranking officials, inspired by Anakin's redemption, chose to defect as well. One of these defectors connected with Luthen Rael, a seasoned rebel from the shadows of Coruscant, and provided critical information. The Death Star, they learned, harbored a devastating flaw in its design, a vulnerability deep within its structure. They also learned that Emperor Palpatine himself was rumored to be on board the Death Star, overseeing its progress. To the rebellion, it was the perfect opportunity to strike, a chance to shatter the Empire's iron grip in one decisive blow. Anakin and Obi-Wan led the attack personally, each piloting an X-Wing at the front of the rebel assault. As they approached the massive superweapon, Anakin's senses flared.
I have a bad feeling about this.
He could feel Palpatine's presence like a shadow gripping his mind. Palpatine was on the Death Star. Anakin was now certain of that. But there was something more, a sickening realization that sent a chill through his spine.
He knows. He knows about them, Obi-Wan. Luke and Leia.
I don't know how, but somehow he has found out about them.
He's looking for them.
It's okay, Anakin.
Kenobi's voice came back steady and sure.
Just focus. We can put a stop to all of it today.
Steeling his resolve, Anakin led the first wave, diving into the trench as blaster fire streaked past. The assault began successfully. Rebel bombers streaked across the surface, sending plumes of fire and debris into the sky, while Obi-Wan and his squadron engaged the defending TIE fighters. Anakin, alongside two other X-Wings, began his trench run, lining up for the shot that would destroy the Death Star. But just as he fired his first torpedo, they were attacked from above. Three more Imperial fighters had joined the fight, and piloting them were three of Palpatine's Sith apprentices. As they unleashed their attack, Anakin's focus was disrupted. Anakin's torpedo struck the Death Star's surface, sending shockwaves through the structure, but it missed its mark. Forced to abandon the trench, Anakin broke off, engaging with the Sith apprentices as chaos erupted across the battlefield. Both Anakin and Obi-Wan could sense the dark presence of Palpatine's apprentices, as they led the Imperial fighters in a ruthless attack, overwhelming the rebel fleet.
This isn't working!
Obi-Wan, there's too many of them.
We have to get out of here.
All wings, retreat! I repeat, retreat! Fall back to base!
Much destruction was dealt by both sides, and ultimately the rebels were forced to retreat. The Death Star remained, badly damaged but still intact, and the Emperor on board was still alive. Back at the rebel base on Hoth, there was a somber air. Obi-Wan addressed the gathered fighters, his voice steady and resolute as he spoke words of hope. Today the rebels had lost, but with courage and time they would find victory. A few days later, Anakin flew alone in a small rebel transport, descending through the clouds of Sorgan, a quiet world of wetlands and farming villages. It was where Kenobi had taken Owen, Beru, and Luke after the battle on Tatooine. With Palpatine aware of his children's existence, Anakin and Obi-Wan knew that Luke, Owen, and Beru were no longer safe in hiding. Anakin and Owen's initial conversation was tense, Owen's stubbornness clashing with Anakin's insistence that Luke was in danger. But surprisingly, Owen ultimately relented. Though he was firm that he and Beru wouldn't continue running around the galaxy trying to hide, he agreed that Luke would not be safe with them anymore, and that he should go with Anakin.
Where is he?
Anakin asked. I'll show you, Owen replied, leading him through the tall grass of the wetlands. In the distance they saw Luke, now 13, standing at the water's edge, fishing quietly by himself. Owen stayed back as Anakin approached alone, the crunch of wet grass beneath his boots the only sound. Anakin paused a few feet away, watching his son for a moment before speaking, a rush of 1,000 different emotions flooding him all at once.
Annie, I'm pregnant.
This is a happy moment. The happiest moment of my life.
Hello, Luke. Are you catching anything?
Luke turned, glancing down at the fish laid out in the grass before meeting Anakin's gaze.
Yeah, I caught a few.
He replied, eyeing the stranger with curiosity.
How do you know my name? Who are you?
Anakin hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Finally, he forced them out.
I'm a friend of your uncle's.
Luke studied him, his eyes narrowing with a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place. His gaze wandered down to the mechanical respirator on Anakin's chest, curiosity flickering across his face.
You seem familiar,
Luke said, his voice softening.
How do I know you?
Anakin drew in a slow, steady breath, feeling the weight of the moment press upon him. His eyes locked with Luke's, and with a tremor in his voice, he answered,
Luke, I am your father.